Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this short session. Tim Baker's my name. I'm going to talk about a team values charter and the value of it, how you go about doing it. And I'd strongly recommend you give this a go because I think you'll find it's really, really powerful. It can seem deceptively easy, but I think you'll find it actually works extremely well. And it doesn't take much time and it can give you tremendous results in the end. So let's get underway. I'm just going to share my slides, of course, and we will launch into the presentation, which is only 30 minutes. Okay, so just a little bit about me. Some of you may know of me, but may not, and I just thought I'd give a quick intro. I obviously give keynote speeches. I run workshops. I lecture, I write books. I've written 13 books, and I also play rugby in the Golden Oldies competition here in Brisbane, which I might say it's a bit tragic at my age, but it takes 2 weeks to recover. We only play every 2 weeks because it takes 2 weeks to recover at my age. Anyway, that's a little bit about me, and let's launch into the topic. We've only got a short time together, so I want to maximize that. And let's move on. So the book that I wrote, which of course is Winning Teams that you saw on the outset there, there's a couple of testimonials that people have written about the book. I actually decided, as I said before, I play rugby in the Golden Oldies competition. I was always depressed every year, every time we got beaten by the All Blacks, and I started getting curious about that and trying to find out a little bit more about what they did. And so I got an opportunity to talk to a couple of All Black legends, as you can see on the screen there, Nick Farr-Jones, of course, and Tom Lawton are Wallaby greats, but I got to talk to people like Grant Fox and John Kerwin and a number of other players, and pretty much found out what they did off the ball or what they did off the field, which I thought was very interesting. And they themselves have completed a team values charter, but it's slightly different to the version I'm going to share with you. Katarina Carroll of Queensland Police, Commissioner of Queensland Police, also wrote a nice testimonial about the book. And Nick Farr-Jones there had something to say about the book too, which was very kind of him to do so. So I'm going to give you a special offer at the end of this presentation at the end. And we talked about a number of different values and so forth. I think the key thing I want to talk about today is how do you actually get people to take values seriously? Now, we all know there's a plaque on the wall, and we all know that people walk past it every day if they're working in an office environment, and often people don't pay much attention to it. It's not so much that they disagree with the values that are in the charter. They probably don't have much say in what those values are. And as a result of that, people kind of don't take them too seriously. The approach I'm going to take here is you're not trying to countermand the values organisationally, they're still there, but the values charter that I'm talking about here is actually a process of how you might work together to galvanise your team. That's what it's about. So it's really essentially asking people how they want to be treated in your team, which I think is a fair, reasonable question to ask. So the question there, which is often an objection, is how do you get people to take value seriously? Well, the way you do that, of course, is get them to give you the values. Shouldn't be a big secret, but that's the truth of it. If you get people to share with you what their values are in terms of the way they'd like to operate in a team, then you'll find that people will take those values seriously because they've got skin in the game. And I think that's the key point I want to make there, that's the difference between the plaque on the wall and what I'm going to talk to you about today. So there's 3 elements I want to talk about, or 3 things today, and we've only got 30 minutes, and you might be aware that every Friday at 10 o'clock, Brisbane time at least, I run these short, sharp sessions. So you're more than welcome to come to each session. They're free, and I just provide hopefully a little bit of information that might help you improve what you're doing in your workplace. So ultimately, I want to talk about trust, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do here is to galvanize greater trust in our team. And of course, I'm going to talk about how to complete a team values charter. And I've got a special offer for you, as I mentioned, at the end of the presentation that you might like to take advantage of. All right, so 3 basic things. So let's launch into looking at trust. Now, what you're seeing on your screen there, Aubrey Warren, who's a colleague of mine, and I wrote a book called Conversations at Work, and ultimately we came up with 5 different elements of trust. And the argument is that if any of these elements are violated, and they often are, then trust levels go down. And so here's something to think about from your own perspective, and I just want to run through them briefly. And once we've done those, I'm going to share with you the charter and how I might go about that and why they're important and how that can contribute to each of these. So openness is critically important, and those of you who are more extrovert than introvert would probably not have an issue with this, but sharing a little bit about yourself, and I don't mean your deep, dark secrets, but if you share a little bit about yourself, then what happens is that other people, they share a little bit about themselves because there's no risk there, and it just opens up the lines of communication. And psychologists call this self-disclosure. So there's got to be a little bit of that. You can't be a closed book. You have to share a little bit about yourself and who you are. And hopefully what that does is build a level of rapport with your team members. There's also a need for acceptance. And what do I mean by that? It means that you shouldn't be in the business of judging. You should be in the business of accepting the way people are. And what that really means is that you can accept that, you have certain interests and certain views of the world, and really they're your interests and they're your views of the world, and other people have their own interests and views of the world. And if people can just accept that people are different, it would be great. Unfortunately, we're living in a world now where people really rail against people who have different sets of values and different beliefs and all the rest of it, which is kind of sad in a way. I think we just accept how people are and move on. You can still work together. Congruence is really much what you say is what you get. So I guess the point is, if you're a team leader or you're a manager and you make, you say something and you don't follow through, then that's incongruent rather than being congruent. So I always say it's good to underpromise and overdeliver, which is the old customer service adage. And I think it's very true for leadership as well. So I think it's really important to do that. And that way, your word is your bond, so to speak. So basically it means don't promise something. Be cautious about what you promise, because if you can't deliver on it, automatically what happens is your trust level goes down, because people say your word is not your bond. And then you've got a problem. People want you to be reliable too. They want to have the same, they want to know what your, expectations and standards are. And they want you to basically live up to those expectations and standards, not just personally, but also how you work with the team as well. And they want to know that you're reasonably competent in what you do. And I think there is an element of that. And if you're working in a technical area, well, people will want to think that you've got technical capabilities, because that level, that gives people a sense of safety and trust. So that's ultimately the 5 things that are critically important. And as I said before, if any of those things are violated, then the trust level's going down. So it just gives you a little framework to work from. Are you open? Are you accepting? Are you congruent in your actions and your word? Are you reliable in terms of what you expect of other people? And reliability and consistency could go together there. And are you, do you have a level of competence that people can feel confident about? So ultimately, those things are critical. Now, how do you then sort of navigate on to work towards a team values charter? Now, I first put this together in 2015 in a book called The New Influencing Toolkit. And I was pleasantly surprised at how popular it became. And people, there are teams all over the world that are using this, which is very nice. And it should take you no more than 20 minutes. So it's not some big deal. And I often say to people, you know, when you're completing this charter, do it in a team meeting. Don't sort of suggest to people that they do it prior to the team meeting. And I'll give you a very practical reason why. If you ask them to do it before the meeting, it's inevitable, law of averages, there'll be one of them that doesn't do it for whatever reason, and then you've got to wait for that person to complete it. So my view is just do it in a team meeting, and it'll add variety to your meeting apart from anything else, but you'll be able to create this charter in the team meeting. So it's very powerful. And just to clarify what we're trying to do here, the team values charter is all about developing a framework or a charter as to how each person in the team will interact with each other. So ultimately, this is kind of like a framework, a glue that makes the team stick. And you're actually asking people, basically, if there was one value that was important to you working in the team, what would it be and why? And we'll get into that in a bit more detail in a moment. And I think you'll find it takes you about 20 minutes. So basically what you want people to do is you're just explaining that you're going to develop a team values charter. You don't have to have a huge amount of preamble about it. So just get stuck into it. You don't have to give a big long seminar about it. Just get people to write the answers down to these questions that I'm going to share with you shortly. Now you might say, well, why do I need to write these answers down? Well, you want people to consider it. And I think the other thing is when you write things down, it makes you think a little bit more deeply about it than if you just spruik some answer when you were asked as you go around the room. So that's important. Now, here's the crux of it, and I'll spend a bit of time going through this with you. There's ultimately 4 questions that you're going to ask. And the whole idea here is that when you ask these questions, then you get people to write their answers down on a piece of paper. And what I'd suggest that you do as a team leader is you complete this before the meeting. Why? Well, you're all ready to go and you're setting an example, like I said before, how important that is. So you make sure that you've got an answer to this, because ultimately you're a member of the team as well. Notwithstanding that you might be the team leader, you're still a member of the team. And there are certain values that are important to you as being part of any team. All right, so the first question that you will ask people, and you get them to write this down, is what's one value that's important to you when working in groups and teams? Now, you just give people a chance to absorb that question and you get them to write down one value. Now, people might say, can I write down 2? No, everyone gets one value. It forces people to come up with a priority. So what you're actually looking for is a number one value that everybody wants when they're working in a team. Now, what I've done here is I've shared with you what my values, what my value is. So if you ask me that and I happen to be part of your team, I would say respect. To me, now that's just me, you know, other people have got their own views. I would say respect. I just write the word respect down on a piece of paper if you ask me, or I'd type it into an iPad or whatever. So I've got that written down, and the whole idea is you just scan the room, and you can do this virtually as well. So certainly if you're working in a remote team, I think there's all the more reason to do it then, because you can still do this via Zoom or Teams or whatever system you use. So people have written that down. Then I'm going to ask the next question. So when I look and see everyone's heads up, I'm going to say, what is your definition of that value? Now, the reason why I'm asking you that is that I want, you know, when you write down a word, it can mean different things to different people, can't it? So for example, respect can mean different things to different people. So ultimately I'm asking you to define what that value is. So I might write down, for example, respect is when people are prepared to listen to others, even when they may not agree with their point of view. So ultimately, that's my definition of respect. Now, other people may have a different definition. That's fine, but that's my definition. So basically, if I'm speaking up in a meeting, or if I am wondering whether I should speak up in a meeting, and I have a view that's perhaps not a popular view, I want to feel comfortable that I can share that perspective in a meeting and not be held down and listened to. Now, I don't expect that people may agree with me, but what I'm saying there is that I want people to just be able to listen respectfully to my point of view. And then, of course, they can disagree if they want, but I do want that respect. So ultimately, that would be my statement about that. So what you do is you get everyone to write that down. And obviously we're not after a long-winded one-page definition. I think people should be able to define that in one sentence. And you just ask people to write down what their definition of that value is. At this stage, no one's sharing anything. So we just keep moving on. And when you notice that people are looking up and ready to go for question 3, you ask the third question. And the third question is, why is that value important to you? Now, you might say, why should I be asking that? Well, I think it's really insightful, isn't it? If you're a team leader, you probably want to know why people have selected that value. And it helps you understand their motivation, where they're coming from. It also helps everyone else in the team understand that person's motivation and where they're coming from as well. So if I had to answer that question, I would probably write something like this. I'd say, I like to feel that I'm respected and that my opinions are valued when I'm working with others. To me, that's really important. Otherwise, I'd just tune out. I'm not interested in working in a team where people perhaps aren't interested in what I've got to say, because, at the end of the day, I don't feel that I'm respected. And that's ultimately what my definition of that is. And again, everyone else is going to have their own version of that. They're all going to have their own value, and you get them to think about that. And you can understand now why I'm asking people to write this down, because, mentioning this off the cuff, it's not really it's not going to be as good as it would be for them to write the answer down. Now I've got down to number 3, and now I'm actually on where I guess you could say this is where the rubber meets the road. This is a critical question, because now I'm asking my team what behaviours would be consistent with that value. So this is really about, how do people express that value? Now, if you ask me, for example, and remember mine is respect, I might say, for example, I might write this down, not interrupting me or anyone else for that matter while they're speaking might be a good sign of respect. So yes, people disagree with me. Yes, people disagree with me passionately, but ultimately, when I speak and I'm giving my perspective, I want other people to be tuning in, and ultimately that to me would be a sign that that is actually happening. Now there might be other things that I might write down as well, but that's a pretty good indication as far as I'm concerned. So again, you give everyone a chance to write down the tangible behaviours that would demonstrate that value in action, because these are the sorts of things that people will need to do if they're going to honour your value. So I wait for everybody to finish, and I finish at that point. Now, if you want to, but I don't see any need to, you can add a 5th question, and the 5th question is, what behaviours would violate that value? But ultimately, the behaviours that would violate that value are no doubt the opposite of what you've written down as your answer for number 4 anyway. All right, so people have written down their behaviours. Now, what do I do next? Everyone's written their things down. The next step is I'm now going to ask people to, I'll go back. I'm now going to ask people to share that information. So what I'm going to do, I'll stop sharing for a moment so I can talk about that to you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start with myself. And why do I start with myself? Well, I actually think that, you're basically setting the example, aren't you, by going first. So you'll just say to people, look, I'll read out, this is my answers to those 4 questions. And you just go through and you respond to each of those. I can tell you something very interesting about this exercise. What will happen is that people will really listen. In fact, you'll hear a pin drop in the room if there was a pin dropping in the room. It's quite palpable. And you can understand why, because what you're actually asking people to do is to identify how they want to be treated in a team, and people are always interested in that sort of thing. So you're going to find that everyone's completely tuned in. So I read out mine, and then I might stop and say, are there any questions, any comments, anything that people would like to say in response to my set of values? Sometimes you get people who want to, contribute, and other times you don't. But I would encourage that, because otherwise it's kind of like several static reports, which is fine. It'll still work, but it's nice to get questions of clarification and basically get a conversation going rather than just a series of, reports. Now, when I've finished, then you don't have to say who goes next. Go around the room. So it's kind of like, just say, righto, Fred, could you read out your responses? And you listen very carefully to what they have to say. It might be worthwhile for someone in the group to actually be the scribe, and what you're actually capturing here is not a lot of information. What you're capturing is the value that they've mentioned, so the answer to question 1, and you're also capturing the definition, which is the answer to question 2. You don't need to worry about the answers to question 3, 4, and 5, although I think it's 3 and 4. It's well worth sharing that, but I don't think it needs to be captured in the statement. Okay. So basically the values charter is ultimately a value, a definition, followed by another value, followed by another definition, until, of course, you've exhausted the list. Now, it may well be possible that if you've got 6 people in your team, for example, it might be that 2 people have got the same value. Now, that's not a problem. In fact, that's great, actually. But let's say 2 people have got the value of respect. Now, I suspect that what's going to happen is that the 2 definitions will be different, although they pick the same value. So what I would do is I would encourage those 2 people to get together at the end of the meeting. And what I'd encourage them to do is to create a statement that captures the essence of both of those definitions. Now, by doing that, I've now covered basically 2 people and 1 value. So you might have to do that. And I don't think it's a problem, that it's just a question of making sure you've got a definition that both people are happy with. So we go around the room, and then when you've done that exercise, what I suggest you do is then you publish that, because otherwise it's just a bit of an exercise that you're talking about in a team. When I say publish it, what am I talking about? Well, at the very least, I'd send them a summary via email. But I kind of think it might be worthwhile. You could have these things. I've seen teams have them at the top of the agenda. I've seen actually people literally frame these things and put them on the wall. I've had people who have put them on their screensavers, and you be creative. Think about how you do that. The bottom line is this, that you've now got a series of values by which you can now hold the team accountable. And those values have come from the people that you lead. And so you're the custodian of those values. And so what it means is that you can look at every single thing that happens in your team through the normal prism of processes and procedures, which is, what you'd probably normally do anyway. Or you can look at it through a prism of a series of values on the charter. So either way, you've got this great sort of capacity to be able to give people feedback, to be able to talk to people about what they're doing in the team. So for example, let's talk about this. Let's say that, respect is on the list, and let's assume that somebody in one of your meetings interrupts somebody and basically says that it's not going to work. Let's say that Jack has just joined your team, and Jack is all excited, and he has all these great ideas and he wants to share them, so he does that. But halfway through, while he's talking, Jill interrupts him and basically says, oh, that doesn't work. You know, we've tried that before and it doesn't work. Basically put Jack back in his box. Now, you know what my definition is, which is respect. So obviously that's on the charter. Now, you as a team leader may not have selected that value. However, you can sit down with Jill at the end of the meeting and say to Jill, when you interrupted Jack during the meeting, do you think that that was consistent with our charter? And Jill might say, well, you know, I was just correcting him because he was wrong. And you could say, no, I'm not talking about whether what you said was right or wrong. I'm really more interested in whether or not you felt that that was consistent with the values of our charter. Now, obviously, if Jill's not defensive about it, she may well say, yeah, I realise we've got respect on the list and maybe I should have heard him out. Now, if she doesn't say that and she's not aware of it, then of course, can't you say that? And so you can then say, well, look, I think, you know, obviously one of our values is respect. And clearly you basically, in my view, didn't show respect to Jack because, and she might then say, oh yes, because he was wrong. I say, no. It's not a question of whether you were right or wrong. It's a question of actually letting that person finish what they're saying. And then you certainly have every right, of course, to say what you think. You see how it works? It's quite powerful. Now, when you know it's really powerful is actually when other people are holding themselves accountable. That is incredibly powerful. So when you hear somebody else pulling someone up about their own performance, and on the basis of the team values charter you've created, you know that this thing is really working well for you. So I would strongly urge you to give it a go. You'll be pleasantly surprised at that. So 2 other things before I want to finish up, if I may, and I'll just put my slides up again. And then okay. So 2 things before I finish up. Next Friday, we've got another one of these short, sharp sessions, and I'm going to talk about the power of leading by example. I think it's the most underrated leadership capability, and I think often people miss the point about this. If your rhetoric is inconsistent with your behavior, then obviously people are not going to, you know, they'll do what you do, not what you say, ultimately. And I want to talk about how you can lead by example. I want to give you some opportunities to consider that. So same time every week, 10 a.m. That's Australian Eastern Standard Time. There's the link, and all you do, because I'll be sending you a copy of the slides and the recording. Maybe not today, but you'll get that in the next couple of days. And you can just click on that link and by all means, you can join me for any of these sessions. So that's something I'd like to share with you. And the very last thing I'd like to say to you as a special offer is that obviously this material and next week's material comes out of my book, Winning Teams, the 8 characteristics of high-performing teams. If you'd like a copy of that book, if you go onto Amazon, you'll be paying about $35, inclusive of postage. However, if you come through me, in other words, you send me an email by the close of business today, I will offer you that book for $25, inclusive of postage, which is a fair deal. So happy to hear from you. So if you'd like to get a copy, I will sign it for you and send it out to your address, and away you go. So folks, that's it from me. Thank you for joining. I hope you found something in there useful for you, and I look forward to perhaps seeing you next week. And if you'd like a copy of the book, you know what to do. I'm ready for that. So all the best, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and give the team values charter a go. I think you'll be very pleasantly surprised at how incredibly useful it is. Thanks, everyone. All the best. See you next week. All the best. Bye.